For the first two events in this series, the focus was art and real estate and demystifying the art buying experience. Today's topic is art and progress. It's a subject that is both timely and timeless. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines progress as, quote, a forward or onward movement toward an objective or goal, and also as, quote, gradual betterment. I chose this topic because when it relates to art, I think our understanding of progress is changing. For much of the 20th century, progress was defined in material, quasi-universalist terms, as in the internal development of an art form, genre, or movement. Today, progress is increasingly about issues of inclusion, accessibility, social equity, and justice, which puts the attention on the context of art and the biography and experience of the artist as much as on the artwork. Now is the time where I have the pleasure to introduce our three panelists. Sandy Bellamy is the director of the General Services Administration's Percent for Art program. Since 2012, she has overseen more than 500 competitive art commissions and acquisitions for DC public buildings, including schools, recreation centers, shelters, and other sites. She holds undergraduate and law degrees from Howard University, where today she is an adjunct professor in art history. Charles JeanPierre, also known as JP, is a Haitian-American artist with a studio in DC's Eckington neighborhood. His public art murals can be found in Canada, France, Great Britain, Haiti, Panama, South America, Turkey, and elsewhere. Originally from Chicago's South Side, he is currently an adjunct professor at American University. This year, he also has a quite amazing piece in the Art Month sale entitled Future Memories 3, a mosaic-like monoprint acrylic collage. And finally, Kara Ober. Kara lives in Baltimore, where she is the editor and publisher of Be More Art, a magazine she founded in 2007. I encourage any of you unfamiliar with the magazine to support local arts journalism by going online and purchasing a copy today. Kara holds an MA from Maryland Institute College of Art and a BFA from American University. She has two works in the Art Month sale, both are beautiful digital collages that she has titled Elegies. So I want to thank all of you and the panelists for joining us today. And I want to start by asking a rather open-ended question that I want to address to all three of you to answer as you wish. And that question is, since the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many others, there's been a renewed attention over these few months on the systemic racism in our society. Where do you think we stand today on this path towards equity and social justice within the US art world? And are you feeling optimistic or pessimistic in this moment? I want to kick it to JP if he's up for leading with this, because we just had he just told me an interesting story about his trip to Haiti and his experience with local artists there and the economy there. It was sharing his experience as it relates to his experience here in the US. So JP, you want to give that a shot? If you can hear us, I think you're muted. Yeah.
All right, Charles JeanPierre, feel free to call me JP. I have a bit of a tan right now. I was in Haiti for a week. I operate from a place of, from a global perspective and a place of privilege. I talked to Peter about this earlier. My whole life having an American passport has given me kind of like keys to the world. I spend a lot of time in South Africa, a lot of time in Haiti and Latin America. I do feel freer there, but I also understand the obstacles that they face. You know, I've been told by artists like, you're lucky to be American, you're lucky, you know. So after Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and even Jacob Blake, I think that one hit me even harder for some reason. I had to, instead, my first reaction wasn't to reach out, scream out, protest, create art against it. It was more reflective to go inside of myself and make sure I was safe, I was whole, I was at peace. I'm finally getting old enough to be at a certain age where I can start to recognize cycles and patterns, and my work is all about patterns. And I feel like we were in the same position 4 years ago, right before Hillary, with Philando Castile and Mike Brown, heading into the 2016 election cycle. I think oftentimes our bodies, our Black bodies, are politicized. And we're told things like, go out and vote because, you know, Jacob Blake couldn't vote or Mike Brown couldn't vote. But I think globally, we've been suffering. Darker people have been suffering. It's not, I don't think it's an American context. And I don't know if that brings me peace or that just makes it more realistic to me, but I'm trying my hardest not to be depressed, to be honest with you. Trying my best to not be depressed by what's being pushed by media right now, because people are dying in Haiti, people are dying in Nigeria, people are dying in China at the hands of people that look like them, you know. So I think that this current climate is really based on racism, but I think it's also based on power dynamics that I think I try to use my work to explain and understand.
Kara, can I ask you specifically with regard within the field of art criticism and art publishing, perhaps? You can speak broader than that if you want, but I'm sort of interested in that. Where do you think we are right now in this journey towards equity and social justice within the art world?
Thanks, Peter. I mean, this is a process. It's a process that doesn't have an end. I mean, there's definitely certain mission and goals, and you know, there are certain things to be accomplished, but it's never going to be done. And I think just by their very nature, artists are people who say things that, you know, they're comfortable saying things a lot of other people might be uncomfortable saying, and they have the ability and the power to say it in a way that is seductive. And whether you're a writer and you're, you know, a satirist, you're writing humor, whether you're writing art criticism and you're, you know, in my case, writing about, you know, abuse of power, or, you know, just the way systems are sort of hierarchical and entrenched in the art world, you know, even in terms of the language that's used in the art world. But, you know, for me, I don't think I have all the answers. I think I'm learning. And what I really appreciate about the work I'm doing in Baltimore is that it is community-based, that it is community accountable, that I have writers approaching our staff all the time saying, I have an idea, I want to express myself, that we're able to, you know, to give people a voice and ideally support them in making a clear statement. And then the other thing that we can do, that we do on a regular basis, is just highlight and explain and analyze and share the amazing work that artists are doing in Baltimore specifically, and also beyond. So, you know, looking at someone like Joyce Scott, who is sort of the preeminent artist of Baltimore, who is a MacArthur fellow, and you know, considering the scope and range of that work, which, you know, is specifically protest, although it's made of glass and beads, and it's incredibly beautiful. But I feel like she sort of sets the bar really high for other artists here, and we would be really, really dumb to not pay attention and follow her lead and learn.
Sandy, I'm going to shift gears with your permission. I wanted to ask you, we've seen since the protests a lot of public art taking the form of murals commissioned by private landlords on the surfaces of boarded up storefronts. But art in public spaces has long been used by governments as well. Thinking specifically, and you and I spoke about this earlier, Mayor Bowser's Black Lives Matter Plaza, to express or embody certain ideals and values, be they socialist or capitalist. How do you think about the role of public art in upholding and advancing social values from your perspective as someone working in city government? And I'm quite interested in that. And what of those values are most important to you? And it's kind of a big question, but.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. As we talked about earlier, governments, leaders, pharaohs, kings, dictators, emperors have used art to promote a set of values for millennia. It's not unusual for government to commission artwork to reflect the ideals of the people in power of that government. I think artists, if history is prologue, artists will always participate in the process of reflecting the ideals of society. Now, should we hold those individual artists accountable for the values of the particular patron? We talked about that. The answer is probably no, because we probably would not have any art commissioned by government if we dissected the values of the particular leader that commissioned the artwork. However, the art still stands. The art still inspires people. If we look at all of the art commissioned by the Catholic Church during the Renaissance, the art still stands. If we look at all of the art commissioned by Louis XIV, the art still stands, although there are tremendous legitimate critiques against the people or the particular patrons of those eras. I think that pattern will still persist. The important thing is that artists do have the opportunity to create work in public space that informs our individual and collective psyche of who we are as a people, what values we have as a people. It's important that we commission culturally diverse artists so that we promote culturally diverse perspectives on our society in America in particular. In Washington, D.C., the predominant public art form is neoclassical. Lots of guys on horses from battles, very few women, very few works commission of artists of color, even in a place like Washington, D.C., relatively speaking. For my role in Washington, for DC government, it's just in my DNA to commission artworks from artists of all kinds of cultures that make up the city to reflect a truer narrative of who we are as a people. Has my art practice changed since the killing of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor? I'm going to say no, because that's always been my practice. And I know for some, it has changed their conversation. It may be a bit late for, to have that conversation in 2020. I'm a child born in 1970, so I was raised with the notion that the country that I lived in had progressed beyond segregation, beyond Jim Crow, but we're constantly reminded that there's an element in society that does prefer to be regressive as it pertains to social inclusivity. Whose America is this? But for me, that's always who I've been. That's why I ended up studying art history at Howard University in particular. I loved art, went to museums. In fact, it was specifically the National Gallery of Art that propelled me to go to Howard. because of the lack of artists of color represented in their collection on display. And I knew that I would find out who those artists are at Howard University. And from that, implant myself into the museum field to help expand that narrative. So I applaud people that are just beginning to have that conversation. Although I do think that as Americans, especially born in the 20th century, now 21st century, some of my students were born in the 21st century. I'm still trying to get used to that. You know, honestly, I feel like that's where we should have been all the time. Because, you know, that is the diversity that made America a flagship for many other people from around the world to come and enjoy freedom. But no, my practice hasn't changed, but I am encouraged by the increased attention on public art. I'm very encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the Black Lives Matter Plaza. Again, you know, there could be lots of conversation about the rationale, the reasons behind it. The point is the art was made and it inspired people around the world to emulate that particular work of art to express a simple yet seemingly complicated notion to many that Black Lives Matter. So I'm also glad to see private entities and public entities commission more art during this time because, again, people are focused on public art. In fact, there are 2 major grant applications issued by foundations to expand the landscape of public art in America around the country. So I think that, you know, every problem presents an opportunity, and this is our opportunity for artists to cut through the noise of social media and divisiveness, some of it which is intentional. You know, there are rumored bot farms propagating this information. Artists have always had the ability to cut through the noise and speak directly to people's souls. And the more perspectives we have from artists at the table, I think our journey to becoming a truer sense of the meaning of America, the meaning of freedom, the meaning of democracy, or as you say, the progress toward a goal, Peter, that's a good goal, that's a good progress. And so, yeah, while I may be a bit skeptical about whether or not we'll be in the same situation 4 years from now from another police killing, or we probably will be, you know, we probably will be, but I do think that the ability of artists to again cut through all of the technology and social noise that we're overwhelmed with that can create anxiety and depression in us, can help us reveal the truth of humanity that does truly exist among us if we can just cut through that noise. And I'm very excited about artists getting more opportunities to do that for us as a country.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah. I have a question to the 2 artists that are here. And some of the points that you just made, Sandy, I think are relevant to the question vis-a-vis your own work in the museum field. And the question is, working as artists in the region with no shortage of huge museums can be both validating and frustrating. Validating in the museums are both national statements of support for the arts, and frustrating because they embody the structural biases of the nation that gave birth to them. We were recently reminded of this when the National Gallery of Art postponed its Philip Guston show. What role can individual artists play in confronting these massive bureaucratic agencies and helping to accelerate change? Kara or JP, who wants to take that one?
Let's go Kara on this one.
Come on. I don't even know where to start. I'm a huge Philip Guston fan. And if you read his writing, I mean, I saw his work in Venice a few years ago. It was a fantastic retrospective. I've written about him. I think he's a hugely significant and artist whose work is still relevant today. And I think with a lot of great art, it has the possibility of being misunderstood or misconstrued. And the context around that work can make all the difference. So, and I think COVID makes things more complicated, because when you cannot be in a space with someone, you cannot, see someone eye to eye, digital space makes communication more challenging, and it separates people, and we can see the sort of increased strife and division and arguments and fighting online that goes on. So while I empathize with a museum that sort of doesn't want to deal with that, I think it's their job to, especially an artist like Guston, whose clan paintings are specifically about America. I mean, they're specifically about the president that we have right now. I mean, he didn't intend them to be, but they are. I think it is the museum's job to provide that context, that education, to explain to people what they're seeing and why, so that, people aren't necessarily, triggered. People aren't feeling threatened by the work. Museums have the most power of any entity in the art world. They have the power to legitimize artists' careers. They have the money and resources to invest in them. And this seems like a strange sort of sidestepping of institutional responsibility.
I think one of the things that I find really interesting in this, and I want to switch over to the Baltimore Museum while we're
I want to know
talking.
what JP thinks. Sorry.
We can go to Baltimore.
Yeah, no, good.
Maybe we can go to Baltimore and then
back to Guston.
I'm
We're
okay.
never going back to Guston. You know that.
If we leave it. I guess what I was going to say, and we can talk about this in the context of furthering the Guston conversation. With the Guston show, it's a situation where a museum that rightfully, like other museums, might come under attack from artists for being a certain way. In this case, you have artists actually speaking out against the museum for canceling a show and showing sensitivity, what it perceives as sensitivity to a subject. So there's a certain inherent tension there between, whereas in other situations, we have artists around the country that are, and staff that are forcing major curators out of their positions because of programs that are deeply problematic given the communities that they serve, et cetera. Artists in some of these situations are taking sort of an opposite position. And just briefly to the Baltimore Museum situation, there you have a situation as well where artists are speaking out in a way where a museum is doing something in its mind to advance social justice, but the artists are speaking out against the way that they're approaching that. So I think it just gets, my point being that as artists are putting pressure for change on museums, not all the ways that change is being gone about are necessarily in artists' complete interests. It's complicated.
It's messy. It's incredibly messy. And I'm back for 1 second to the Guston. I think it would be really interesting if museums invited contemporary artists to show their work alongside Guston. I mean, if it would be possible to offer that kind of contemporary reaction with a group of really diverse contemporary artists who want to either challenge or react to, I think that might be a little bit more work, but I think it would be fascinating to see that exhibit. And in Baltimore, things have been really, it's been a lot of drama. I mean, people are calling it scandalous. There's been news headlines every day.
So maybe some
And,
quick description of what's happened there for anybody that doesn't
So,
know.
it's not a quick story. It's not.
Yeah, okay.
Museums are allowed to sell art only to buy more art, and only art that is redundant in the collection. So not, individual works, but if there's a multiple from an artist, and you sell off the works that are worth less than the, most important pieces, and then you can use that work to then add to the collection. Those are the rules. The rules were set to protect museums and their tax exempt status. So in Baltimore, the National Organization of Museum Directors announced in April that they were going to open a loophole because museums are really struggling. So for any museum that is, there's a threat of layoffs, there's a threat of closure, they said, you know what, for the next 2 years, you can sell off redundant works from the collection and you don't have to use it to buy more art. You can actually use it for care of the collection, which means operating costs, salaries, whatever you need. So in the case of Baltimore, they saw that opening, and what people are not happy about is that they selected works that were not redundant, that are sort of pretty large and familiar masterpiece works. They selected these works because of their value, monetary value. They expect to get 65 million, and 10 million of that is going back into the collection. And then the rest, 55 million, was supposed to go into an endowment. And then they were going to use that money for salaries and for diversity and amazing, wonderful things that we want the museum to do. So the controversy that erupted was around them sort of breaking these rules that exist to protect a museum. So you don't do mission-based fundraising by selling off art. That makes a museum vulnerable. If you value something, you fundraise, you raise the money, you get community support so that your changes are sustainable, so that the community supports this and it doesn't just evaporate and become some sort of fad that disappears with leadership. So those are sort of two sides of it. The museum says on moral grounds they should be allowed to break the rules, and they didn't break the rules. Other people are saying, we want you to do these things, but we don't think you should sacrifice your collection. So it's been very divisive. People are really upset and people are arguing, and for me, it's very frustrating to see people dividing from one another and fighting, and when we really need sort of all the support collectively that we can around DEAI initiatives in museums and in collections, which I completely support.
Yeah.
That was as fast as I could make it.
I'm
I'm so done with this. I'm so tired.
One institution I'm working with right now is the Embassy of Haiti here in the U.S. on Massachusetts Avenue. And we're commissioning public art, Sandy. I'm sure I was going over the review process. We're like creating a rubric and all of this of Haitian sculptors to bring up to the U.S. to create this public art piece on Massachusetts Avenue here in D.C. And the figure, this is kind of private information, but we're planning on creating a sculpture of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was one of the freedom fighters of the Haitian Revolution. So next to Gandhi and all of these quote unquote white men liberators on horses, you'll have a black man who liberated his nation here in Washington, D.C. So I'm working on that project, and I kind of moved and shifted from like an artist to like a art consultant with that project. So I'm working with that institution. I'm the only American-born working on that project, and I'm curating at the embassy too. So I'm working to try to, the space is already there, but make the space open to not only the DC community, but the entire Haitian American community. this is an opportunity for me to talk about kind of my gallery. So this art workshop space, Atelier in French, what you'll find in Haiti is most artists, since there is a lack of space, will convert their studios into galleries, like half studio, half gallery, in order to sustain themselves. And I use that model here. And so I'm featuring Haitian artists from Haiti and African artists from the continent and LGBTQIA artists here in Washington, DC, leveraging the privilege that I have and my access to space to allow other people to come in. But I'm also trying to leverage and access the Haitian embassy, or the Embassy of Haiti here in the US too. So I just came in at a role of support and help from the bottom, and trying to elevate that and make it more inclusive. So my answer to the question is kind of like, I don't have answers on how to kind of shift what these national institutions are doing, but kind of like get in where you fit in. And so I fit in at the Haitian Embassy, and I'm trying to do my best to kind of open and expand the opportunities that people have to display in that space. So the last exhibition I curated there was called Diaspora Expressions. We featured 42 artists living outside of Haiti, from Montreal, US, and abroad, and put them in the embassy. And that was their first embassy show. And I got the idea from being a US artist and embassies artist. So my work is in Benin, West Africa right now, and Niger, West Africa. And I was like, I could model that program for Haitian artists at this institution for us. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for bringing it back to the get in where you fit in. I like that. I've never heard that before. It's awesome. Sandy, you have I'm jumping a little bit here, but I wanted you to talk just really briefly about, you have a really, what I think a really radical model in terms of how you select the artists that participate in your public art program and that you commission the works from. And as we're talking about power and we're talking about access, there's multiple aspects to the way you're working right now that I thought made a lot of sense in this conversation. So if you could just briefly share those with us, that would be great.
Well, I never really thought of it as radical. I thought of it as pragmatic. In the process of commissioning public art that exists in public spaces, it made sense to let the people in the community decide what they want in their space. And a lot of this thinking came from Rick Lowe and Project Row House in Houston. I studied his program as we were planning this program for Washington. And one of the key takeaways from his practice is, it's important to meet people where they are, instead of just plopping a work of art in their community selected by people who are not members of the community. It's better to let people tell you what it is that they want. And so again, I thought that was pretty pragmatic. So for DC's program, each property that we commission art for, and we typically commission about 10 works of art per property. And this year we commissioned 100 works of art for the city. Each property has its own group of stakeholders. It's not controlled by highfalutin curators, although I greatly honor the practice of curatorial work. I come from the museum field, So of course, curators are essential in art practice. However, for public art, our panels include art teachers, principals, architects. They include ANC representatives of that particular community. It could include a parent. And for high schools, we include students on the panel. We have a very diverse database of artists from which the panel selects, and very proud of all of the artists who are in our database. They're all exceptionally professional and creative, and range from very young artists to artists in their 80s. And of course, represent pretty much every demographic you could think of. We're always cultivating this database and inviting artists to share their portfolios so that we have a very strong selection from which the panelists select. I do think that it's been a key element in the success of the program. This year, we're probably closer to 650 commissions over the last 8 years of doing this program. We've never had one complaint about the artwork that we've installed in anyone's community. Why? Because we don't select the art, the community selects the art. And I find that the community is perfectly capable of selecting outstanding works of art for their community. The idea that you need curators to select for the community, to me, is not necessary. We do have art trained professionals, for instance, the arts supervisor for the school system, the arts teachers themselves. They're usually practicing artists, MFAs. So we still have arts experience on the panel. However, they are artists within that community. And again, you know, I don't think it's radical, Peter. I think it's been a practical thing for us to do as government, because we never want to be put in a situation where we commission a work of art and the community hates it. We commission what the community wants.
Yeah, I get that. It just goes against the way so much of the art world works. That's what's so beautiful about it.
And it needs to change. I think that technology has certainly enabled our program to be extremely inclusive, because we've intentionally reduced the barriers. When I started public art, a lot of artists didn't even want to participate in public art. Some because some people thought the art was kind of hokey, you know, that it was art meant to please everyone, that, you know, it didn't really have a soul. Or sometimes people didn't want to participate in public art because the barriers were so high. You had to pay for your application to even be submitted, or you needed 5 years of public art experience. We reduced all of those barriers. All I ask for is your resume and 10 images. And I can see the consistency in your work through your portfolio images. And I can see your practice over the years through your resume. I don't need 5 years of public art experience, because I connect artists to fabricators, to architects, to engineers. If they conceive it, we can fabricate it. I've not yet encountered one artist that was not able to successfully complete their design commission, or their commission based on the design that they submitted. Again, you know, going back to Rick Lowe, meet people where they are and help them substantively with the resources that they need so that they can expand their portfolio, they can share their vision with the community. And so then we get new perspectives in our public built space that we didn't have before, because we're not saying, oh, we're just sticking with the artists that have already been doing public art. No, we're not doing that here at DGS. Yes, we have lots of experienced public artists participating. Wonderful, they're great. But a big part of our intention is to nurture and cultivate artists, from emerging artists to mid-career artists or even senior artists, to translate their work large scale in a public space that may be fabricated of materials that are sustainable to last as a permanent work of art. So we commission permanent works, not temporary works. These works will forever enhance the landscape of Washington, D.C. But again, you know, including stakeholders is essential in representing truth and authenticity and cultural diversity in our public environment.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one last, we're getting towards the end here, and we might get a question or two, but before we do, I had a question for JP, as an artist who's been living in DC for some time. And as you know, we've seen DC changed a lot in the last decade or so in terms of its development and gentrification, and the challenges of being an artist here are of staying here as an artist are not insignificant. So economic considerations aside, I'm just curious what cultural conditions, and I've heard all of you to varying degrees sort of hint at this or sort of nod towards this as we've been talking, but what cultural conditions do we need to maintain or need to be enhanced in this community, or also, I mean, Kara, if you want to speak to this from Baltimore, to ensure that DC is a place where artists will be able to live, work, and flourish for, you know, a decade from now.
Yeah, that's definitely loaded too. It's interesting. I'll try to make it short so that we can open it up for other people. But I have to start out by saying that, like, I've had 3 murals taken down in the last 4 years. And I'm honored to meet you face to face, Sandy, because I did the Chuck Brown mural in 2012 with James Fox, and that just came down this summer. That hurt my heart. And so I got hired at AEU because of the public art that I was doing and my connection to like street art. And I was part of my like interview process, bringing kids in from AEU, from Upper Northwest into DC. Downtown near the Verizon Center, I had a mural on Holy Rosary Catholic Church that came down. They just did a street. I think roll with the punches. I'll try to keep it as low as possible. So like get in where you fit in and roll with the punches. Like it hurt that those murals came down, but just make new connections and we'll make more murals. Sandy's doing a great job with that. My neighbor, Melvin Nesbitt, his artwork is up there. So plug to Melvin. I saw him chopping away this summer, and James chopping away this summer, and at my 52 Street studio. Roll with the punches, make connections. There's opportunities out there. And I mean, this is a secret. It's not much of a secret, but at one point when I was between studios, I rented out a huge storage space. And I've seen folks moving out of the city. Don't be scared to not have everything together. That's from artists to other artists. So if you need to rent out a 15 by 10 studio storage space to create your art, do that until you can gain enough money, gain enough of a resume, gain enough of a connection and network to move out of that space. So I was with 52 Street for 5 years, and every year when the space opened up, I got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I mean, that's quote unquote sustainability. I don't know, but it's just taking one step at a time. That's my short answer. And rolling with the punches.
All the punches for sure. There's a lot of punches. Yeah. All right, you all. Thank you, all three of you, for your time and for sharing your thoughts on these and responding to my questions so thoughtfully. And I appreciate you joining us today. I think in closing, I just want to remind, I don't know that we have any, I guess I'm jumping ahead because I don't see, oh, here is a question. Sorry, one question.
I have a question too.
Oh,
FYI.
good. You did. Great. Why don't we start with yours?
Okay, so my question is for Sandy. And I'm really encouraged to hear you talk about the community coalitions you're building and selecting the art for the community. And I feel like I'm seeing this sort of analogous situation here in Baltimore, even with the museum, where something I thought about was like, why don't we involve the public in some of these museum decisions? And if we did, what would that look like? I mean, the collection belongs to everyone. And, you know, when you take something out or when you add something, it's really great that the curators have all this, you know, research and experience. But have you seen, Sandy, any examples where museums kind of make this process transparent and democratic? Is there hope?
That particular would be to have an advisory.
Sandy, I think you're,
I can't hear you.
yeah, Sandy, I think you're breaking up. It might be because there's another, there's two Sandys on right now for some reason. You might have, they might be canceling each other out.
Let's see if I delete this. I don't know how that other Sandy got up there.
I wonder if Laura can cancel one of them out. Do you see that you're on twice?
Yeah, okay.
There you go. Okay, that might help.
Kara, I think
Oh,
creating a meaningful advisory.
Sandy, you're still, it's like,
I just, Sandy, I just muted you just because it's super garbled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
I'm dying.
you.
do you want it? I wonder if, Sandy, can you sign off and sign back in quickly? Would that work, or does that take too much time? Just, we might get a new clean connection so we can hear what you have to say.
Mr. Big wants to know.
I do too. We all do.
Yeah.
Kara, we actually had lunch in Art Basel like 2013 with Zoe.
Shut up!
Yeah, so I'm putting
Are
two
you
and two together.
Kidding
So,
me.
yeah, so great to make this connection all over again.
I've definitely heard her talk about you, like in the context of work, but that's kind of embarrassing,
Don't
but
worry.
also kind of awesome. But Art Basel is like, wow.
It was pretty hectic, yeah.
We'll have to do it again in the after days.
Excellent. Sandy's back too. Are you back?
Yep.
Great. Okay.
Kara, you know, museum hierarchies, you know, you start with the trustees, then you have the director, then you have the senior curators, then you have the associate curators, right? Those are very powerful positions in framing the landscape of values, going back to what Peter initially inquired, right? Art that represents different values. That power is coveted. However, when you're looking at public museums, the idea of an advisory board is important because who makes up the trustees for museums? Very wealthy people, typically. They may have one or two that are not wealthy, but maybe from academia or maybe an artist, you know, but typically very wealthy people, collectors who have their own interests, And then you have the curators who follow the direction of the trustees, right? So in order to have an effective advisory board related to the collections committee or the exhibits committee or the education committee, the museum leadership, the chair, the executive committee needs to genuinely embrace the recommendations of the advisory board. And that's going to create some mess, you know that.
Well,
Because some things the museum wants to, and of course, you know, museums exhibit schedules are planned years out. It's frustrating even for curators on staff to be able to get their exhibits on the exhibit schedule or their ideas on the exhibit schedule. And then to have a community voice on top of that. So when we look at the traditional hierarchy of museums, the community voice when it comes to what collections are important to us, if we do need to deaccession, what should be deaccessioned, and what should happen with the funds that arise from that deaccession. Should it go to this particular artist, or should it go to this particular educational program? It's going to take some significant willpower from the trustees, specifically the chair and the executive committee, to get everybody on board to listen substantively to museum advisory committees made up from the community. And maybe it shouldn't be one specific group of people that stay for years and years and years, because even that creates another power concentration. I see that, you know, when you have someone on the board that's been there forever, you know, or maybe a senior curator that's been there forever, you know, or even if you create an advisory committee and they've been there forever, you know, they stop listening. You know, they stop listening because they've been in that power position for so long that you do develop, or an institution does develop a sense of groupthink. But, you know, I say this a lot with my artists. There's so much talent here in DC. And for them to get through that small peephole to be validated by a museum is almost impossible. We don't even have a museum dedicated to DC artists at all. I mean, we have the Katzen. The Katzen is partly dedicated to DC artists, and Jack's been doing a phenomenal job there. But do we have like a specific museum dedicated to our artists in DC? No. So
well, and I would argue even that it would make sense for the Hirshhorn, being of DC, I mean, they have so much money to buy art. I mean, I know they don't think so, but like, what if there was a certain, and this is what I would like to see in Baltimore, what if a certain amount of money was guaranteed every year? The Perez Museum recently did this.
Like a fund, yeah.
They spent $140,000, I think, on 8 works of art from 8 Miami-based artists, Miami-based galleries. I don't think there's any like conflict in buying the work of your place and also global work, but I don't know.
It depends on, and then, you know, it depends on the director. And again, when you look at the Hirshhorn, their board members are not based in Washington, D.C., right?
Okay.
The director just came from New York. So they're going to have to have some kind of communication channel to know who the artist community is in Washington. But, you know, leadership, definitely the director, the executive committee, they have to reinforce the necessity of listening to the community. And why should they do that? Because it depends, that will dictate their relevance. That will dictate their visitation. museums across the country have suffered decreased attendance. There are lots of reasons why, but I would say a lot of them can be categorized under the word relevance. You have an entire generation brought up on a whole new method of absorbing information that is a lot different from the traditional museum approach that we began in this country, exported from Europe. It's a very wealthy ideology where, you know, wealthy people collect art. Sometimes they stole artifacts. They put them in glass cases, vitrines. They put a little label on it and they said, look, do not touch and don't even speak too loudly. Don't really engage too physically with others in the gallery around this work of art. This is meant to be viewed in silence. That's the traditional Western museum approach. These, the internet generation, one text label, you know, they're used to getting depths of information, going down the rabbit hole. They're okay with that. Engaging, you know, they're not analog learners. So yeah, if museums want to stay relevant, they need to connect to the community. They need to listen to the community, and they need to kind of step aside, or not step aside, but step away from an antiquated museum practice that is very analog, very classist, in order to maintain viability and visitation. Because I don't care, I mean, unless you're like a trillionaire, billionaire, and you don't need visitation, most museums I know need visitation. Even if they don't need the visitation for the money, they need the visitation to demonstrate to their donors that they're still relevant.
Yeah.
And
Relevance.
maybe it's the artists who can come together to demand these changes, specifically in Washington, D.C., because we do deserve a space. What space that is, I don't know. But, you know, artists have power, a lot of power.
Collectively, absolutely. And I feel like museums would actually be much stronger if they also exhibited the work of their place and time, because I'm just tired of going to museums where all the same artists are on the wall, no matter where I am. I want to know about what's going on in a place. I want to know about the history, the material culture, and I'm not getting that from museums so much right now.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Kara, you can get a lot of information from your phone. These kids can get information from their phone. And that's another reason why museum visitation is declining. You know, we used to have to go to Encyclopedia Britannica or, you know, the library. You know, we have to become more engaged and connected to the community to survive.
That's a great, yeah. And you hit it on the head. I mean, the whole conversation around art and progress, I think bringing it back to relevance is sort of brings it all together beautifully. So thank you for that, for doing that. We're out of time. We had kind of a hard stop at 5. We're already past our hard stop. So I just wanted to, anybody that was out there that had a question that wanted to be asked, you know, I'm really sorry we ran out of time. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And hopefully the panelists will all continue these conversations offline going forward, because there's some great things to chew on here. So thank you all. Last thing I just in closing want to say is I want to remind you that the 2020 Art Month Gallery is open online through Thursday at 6 p.m. The link was shared in the chat, so please check it out. If you have time, I encourage anybody with the means to support artists and buy some work. And
there's so much good work.
Check out Kara's work. Check out JP's work. They're amazing. And also make sure you go online to Be More Art's website and buy some copies of Be More Art as well. Support local
We will send
journalism.
it to you in the mail.
Great. Thank you all very much, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. All right. Bye.